let me start where I started, at least, which is with a exploration a few years ago by myself and Christian Catalini, who was at MIT and then went on to be the chief economist of the DM Association and now is back in MIT in some form. And we were trying to ask ourselves a very simple question. If you were an economist and looking at the blockchain, how would you characterize it? What would be the innovations? And obviously everybody focuses on cryptocurrency, but we wanted to focus on the blockchain part of it. And we came up with a very simple answer, was that a blockchain potentially represented a massive reduction in the cost of verification. Verification is a word that is very familiar to people who are engaged in contract theory. Part of the issues that Oliver Hart and John Moore and Sandy Grossman looked at were the ideas that contracts could be incomplete. And they were incomplete in an important sense. Parties understood whatever each other had done. Of course, they're interacting with each other, they would. But how would you prove to a third party, say a court, what has been done? And that was the big challenge. And if you couldn't do that, then the contracts were incomplete. And that meant that things like ownership and other sorts of instruments would really play an important role. So if we're going to say, okay, blockchains might actually reduce the cost of verification, that could have a potential effect of widening the space of contracts that could be written, which is quite an interesting notion. To take that further, both myself and also Richard, with his co-author Anu Milani, realized that perhaps there were mechanism design solutions, or more important, implementation theory solutions that could augment smart contracts, be written on the blockchain, and allow for the implementation of the sort of mechanisms that economists have been talking about for some time that might solve hold-up problems and overcome issues of contractual incompleteness without resorting to a court. And so we both saw that potential going on, and that's what started our discussion with each other. So basically, blockchains have this potential to reduce the cost of verification, and smart contracts themselves, which are the code base that goes on top of the blockchain to execute transactions, and not just transfers of tokens, but more stuff, could embed actual mechanisms and could be very practical to automate judicial processes and dispute resolution. And we at least had a bit of a proof of concept of that. I was particularly worried about this problem, which is the problem is that you order something on the internet and you don't get the product quality you want, which seems like an insolvable problem in many respects. That's why we don't order on the internet and you go down to a shop or something like that. It occurred to me that using the results of John Moore and Raphael Rapella back in 1988 that were built on by Maskin and Tirole a decade later, what you could do is you could construct they basically showed that there exists some mechanisms that you could construct that could resolve problems such as this one, where parties are not getting shipped the quality of products they expect. And how would you solve that without having to rely on repeated games, or of course going to a court or anything like that? And basically, in my paper at least, I showed that you could sort of do this just by using simple messages. And this was important because messages are the lifeblood of a blockchain. What the blockchain is an aggregation of messages and recording of them that people then use to do stuff with. And so I'm not going to go into too much detail of this, but just to say that there was a situation where you have a buyer and a seller, and a buyer says, you ask the buyer, are you happy with the thing you received? And if the buyer says yes, it's all for good. If no, then you move into what would be called a challenge stage. And that challenge stage is where the real work of the mechanism gets done. Basically, the first thing that happens in a challenge stage is it's bad for everybody. Once you get into a dispute, everybody gets fined a little bit. So you would like to avoid that outcome. So that's some dead weight loss to the relationship right away. Then you have a mechanism. And in this case, it was the seller was going to offer the buyer a choice. Okay, you don't like the quality of the product. I think it was a good product, but I'm going to offer you a discount. Or you can return it. And if the buyer accepts the discount, then that's what they pay, and there's a new contract struck. If the buyer returns the discount, the seller has to pay additional fines. So it turns out that this sort of mechanism works, at least in theory. To avoid any compensation, the seller actually sends the right product. To avoid paying any fines, because they know that the seller is going to stick to their guns in the challenge stage, the buyer claims the product is expected, so long as it is. And so the fear of losing these dollars to a third party in the form of fines or penalties or anything like that keeps everybody from trying to avoid the challenge stage, and keeps everybody doing what was expected of them, And so basically, it's very easy to implement this sort of thing. The seller would need to hold the price plus some compensation in escrow before, while a buyer only pays if the claim is bad. So it's actually not that dissimilar from a slightly augmented dispute resolution process or returns policy. The difference is it's all implemented in smart contracts. It relies on people just communicating through the messages of the mechanism. And of course, that's the whole point. It was hard to do communication outside, which allowed this to occur. But it would actually work. You can imagine the opening up of the contractual space. There are so many trade deals and other things where there's no easy application to courts and laws and other things to do stuff, where this could actually make these transactions a lot safer. And it turns out, my co-author, along with others, had been looking at these mechanisms for some time, and actually run some experiments regarding these things about whether they could work. And in some of the tweaks they do, they can make it break down. But in the case that was, at least to me, most close to the one that I was proposing, the mechanism worked in the lab. So, there's a little bit of proof of concept. And you'd want to do that because these mechanisms are a little bit more complicated than what people are used to. So you want to see if that they understand things. They actually went on to have a recent paper, which is, I believe, was conditionally accepted at the Journal of Political Economy now, to simplify the mechanism even further, these mechanisms even further, what they call a simultaneous report mechanism. And I'll come to that in a second. And what they do, and they also run experiments on this as well. So in other words, can they make it a lot more simple, a lot more robust to issues such as, do people have common knowledge of variables? Do they know everything? Do they really know the truth of what's going on, etc.? And find very good results there. This paper is a bit to work with. It's, your typical 120 pages or more of paper and robustness checks and theorems and so on. So it's not ripe for practical implementation. But it intrigued me enough to wonder if we could take those insights and apply them to all manner of issues to do with the blockchain. So in other words, these mechanisms that economists tend to come up with sometimes, and we'll see an example of this, tend to be a bit, unfamiliar. They're a bit complicated. Despite the revelation principle, they're not straightforward to people. And that makes it quite difficult. And what you're really interested in is when you're forced to take a mechanism and write code for it on the blockchain to actually implement it, you're forced to think very practically about how simple can you make the whole thing. any any improvement in simplicity is a big advantage. And so this paper in particular was a jump from the 1988 paper in terms of simplicity, relating what was a multi-stage mechanism to just a two-stage mechanism. That's a big jump. And you could even amend the contract that I'd originally written about to be like that. It looks a little more complicated, but it's actually more simpler. It doesn't require all these discounts and other things and trying to search out for a new price and stuff like that. It's literally a dispute resolution mechanism on the back of a few messages and statements and agreements going on. So again, that's another thing, but I'm not going to go too much into detail of that today. The thing I want to talk about is, so during the course of exploring this, Richard and I went from thinking about these smart contracts and how they could be implemented for particular applications to thinking about whether these mechanisms could be of import for operating entire blockchains. One of the important things in a blockchain is that all of the decentralized nodes in the blockchain, they're getting broadcast messages, requests for token transfers and all sorts of things. And those broadcast mechanisms are collected into blocks. And what essentially the reason, what requires that to happen is that when a block is proposed, it's confirmed as being the right block, the right set of transactions, by at least a supermajority of other nodes. In the case of Bitcoin, the way that works is that people run a contest to be the proposer and confirmer of the block, which is very akin to, over time, engaging in majority voting. In proof of stake, which is the other dominant form of reaching consensus, it's an actual voting mechanism going forward. And when everything runs smoothly, this is automated. There's no reason to suppose that the blocks being proposed are the wrong ones. Of course, except that everybody's worried about that. Everybody's worried that some malicious agent or an agent with another agenda will come in and alter the transactions in some way and get away with it. So that's an issue. And we wondered if mechanisms could be used there, and that's still an open research question for us. But during the course of that, we were engaged in a lot of discussions with people who had founded blockchain systems at the very highest level. And, the one thing we discovered, and it's interesting we've into this multidisciplinary research, is that agreeing on the same language to discuss things is quite a challenge. I'd say more challenge than the interpreters are having at the moment, translating my Australian English into Chinese. It's quite extraordinary, but and part of it comes from, it's not just the words and their meaning, it's the emphasis of what you care about, what you think is a big issue. And so we all know what economists think are big issues, but what's really interesting is computer scientists think different stuff is really important. And so that creates a wedge in communication that I must say that during this project has probably been our biggest challenge, has just been trying to read the computer science literature and understand where they're coming from. And it's a pretty adjacent field to economics in so many respects. But that was at least challenging for us. So, I know there's some people on the line who have also engaged in this sort of research. And all I can say is kudos to you for being able to bridge those gaps. Anyhow, during the course of that discussion, we were alerted to what was called the MEV problem. MEV stands for minor extractable value. Actually, they wanted to change the word minor to maximum extractable value. But anyway, this is the term they look at, MEV. And we're curious, what was this? What was this thing that they were worried about? And one of the articles that I'm showing here demonstrated that actually within the entire apparatus of the blockchain, all of the blockchains, well, essentially all of the public blockchains, there was a major problem. Now, just to step back a second, the promise of the blockchain is that we can run contracts on the blockchain, and we can do ever more elaborate contracts and make them cheaply run and make them automated, and in particular in the process, because the code is exposed and all that sort of stuff, they'll hopefully be very, very safe and secure. That is the entire promise of this stuff. Everything that we're seeing in the blockchain is not just based on, oh, we've got to have another cryptocurrency as an asset class, blah, 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 but is in fact to enable these contracts. And this has emerged in this entire space called DeFi, or decentralized finance, the ability to have securities essentially akin to what we see in the usual financial markets being blockchain executable. By the way, I should say, feel free to raise your hand and ask any questions if you want to. As I go through this, I can talk on and on, but I will see your hand raise if it comes in. Okay, so in that context, this issue came up of Ethereum as a dark forest. Now, you might recognize the term dark forest, or at least the terminology that I have in English. I don't know how it translates, or was translated. It comes from, probably the greatest science fiction trilogy of the last decade. And this idea is that the idea in the book is that the universe is a dark forest, but let's ignore that for the moment. The idea of a dark forest is that there are predators in the forest, and if you go into the forest and you make yourself visible, you are in trouble. You get killed instantly. And so if there's something that's a dark forest, you want to make sure you're not visible at all, because you'll become a target. And so this article here said that Ethereum, the main blockchain for implementing contracts, was a dark forest. And when we discovered why, it was pretty eye-opening to us. This idea was actually not that recent. That article is 2020. The idea was actually raised on a Reddit forum in 2014. And the idea was, someone noted that when transactions are broadcast on the blockchain, so suppose that, and let's take a very simple example of a contract. Party A wants to have something performed, some service performed, and they're willing to pay a certain amount in tokens for that. Party B is able to perform that service and then provide evidence of it, which can be done on a blockchain, evidence the service has been performed, and then ask for payment. Very simple idea. We do this all the time. It's what we do. We don't put it in those terms. Well, here's what they noticed. Okay, so the party B performs the contract, and they now want to tell party A, who's somewhere out there. It's not like a friend you can call up on the phone. It's all interacting on the blockchain, that they perform the contract and send the evidence to them and say, please send the tokens to my wallet. And so what that is a message that they broadcast out there saying, I've performed the contract, I want my tokens, send them here. Well, that message gets broadcast to everybody, and then eventually gets assembled into a block, confirmed to the blockchain, which then causes the smart contract to run and send the tokens to the party who performed the contract. Beautiful. That's what you want to have happen. It's like simple. Can happen in mere seconds. So what this person on Reddit noticed was it takes some time for that to happen. When I broadcast that initial message, everybody gets to see it. And so this person asked, what is there to stop somebody seeing that message, copying the message, but changing just where the money is going to be set? In other words, pointing to the same evidence and saying where the money is going to be set. And in effect, being able to grab that payment. And the answer should have been, well, they'll be too late. The person who broadcast the payment first should get priority in the blockchain, and it should be fine. But the problem with lags, and also, as I'll show you, with fees getting paid for priority and stuff, is that there's a good chance that won't happen. So in other words, this is what is called front running. There's a thing coming, and other people can come in once that gets visible, and in this case, steal all the tokens from the legitimate recipient. Jeff, I see you drawing on my thing. I don't know how that...
That's a mistake. Sorry about that.
Okay, I didn't even know that was a possible stuff. That's a whole... What are you trying to front run? You're going to run my presentation.
Absolutely.
My presentation's being hijacked. Hijacked it is. Okay. All right. So let me this has a relationship to something that's been out there for a little while. It's not, no one in blockchain invents anything new. What this is Michael Lewis wrote this book, Flash Boys, which is about high frequency trading, whereby because there is, in microseconds, lags in financial markets, if you can get ahead of a big trade that you already know that's sort of been placed in Chicago to execute in New York, and you can get ahead of it, you can earn a little bit of a margin on the arbitrage opportunity that creates, okay? And it turns out that that's enough to cause a lot of activity and a lot of actual real investment in stuff trying to front run. Now that front running is all about an arbitrage opportunity. I mean, that's nothing compared to the front running that was occurring here, which, as you could see, would completely chill any ability to have payments for contracts on the blockchain. And let me put it right now, this is currently the case. This is currently the case. There's groups out there who are now exploring grabbing data on what the kind of front running that's going on. And you can see here, since January 2020, the amount of extracted MEV, and let me explain that in a second, from front running is, $500 million. And it's growing over time. And what that is, so what's that MEV? Well, this is where the computer scientists and the economists have a different view of things. So the computer scientists said, oh, the problem is that the ordering of the transactions matters. And they said to themselves, who has the power to influence the ordering of transactions? Well, that are the miners, because what their role is, they're supposed to collect up these transactions coming from being broadcast into the blockchain, and then they put it into a block and they get to choose the order. They really do. Now, they're supposed to choose the order based on, if somebody offers a higher transaction fee, surely you should be further up in the order and trying to maximize that. But of course, they could also manipulate, they can care even more about that and manipulate the timing. So they hold all the power. So the way the computer scientists saw it was, this was an opportunity that rested with all of the miners or validating nodes or anything on the blockchain to control the ordering of transactions, and they can be bribed, convinced, or whatever to do that. And so they hold all the power. So that's why it's called the MEV problem. To an economist, the problem isn't the miners necessarily. We would think that the problem is the people doing the stealing, but not with the computer scientists. Anyway, so they call it the MEV problem for that reason. And the amount being extracted has been growing over time. And if you look on the just to give you a sense, if you look on the left-hand side here, this is the extracted MEV by type: arbitrage versus liquidation. Arbitrage is the type of front running between exchanges to take small arbitrage opportunities. Liquidation is the sort of thing that I was worried about. People actually coming in, front running, taking tokens that were supposed to go to someone else. Okay, there's very little liquidation. So here's also another computer science mentality. They're saying, okay, well, obviously the big issue is the arbitrage one. There's not much liquidation going on. Well, not to an economist, there isn't much liquidation going on, because who would try to run one of those contracts in this environment? It's a dark forest. You wouldn't want to do so. So to our eyes, that the fact that there was less liquidation was the symptom of that was the bigger problem. And in fact, if you run this going back in time, like a year or so ago, there used to be far more liquidation. But now it's just basically become profoundly unsafe. And actually, Richard and I have tried this. We wanted to see for ourselves. And so we ran a contract, put a contract out there, and then tried to claim the tokens and had our $100 taken away from us. So these bots are out there. They're just waiting for people to do it. It's just that not many people use transaction this way. In other words, the blockchain's main purpose can't be utilized at all because of this problem. On the other side of the diagram there is showing you how much of that increment is going to the miners and how much is going to the other people who are doing the front running. And actually, most is still going to the people doing the front running. The miners are getting some extra benefits because people are bidding up fees, transaction fees, in order to front run. So they're getting they've got more of a priority role. They're selling priority. They get more money from it. But it's still the case that most of the income is going to the people who are generating the front running. So this all relates back to you know, our Roth and his principles for whether markets will operate effectively or not. And in the case here, one of his terms was market safety. If markets aren't safe, they won't emerge. And the front running problem with respect to liquidation is profoundly unsafe. Well, basically, you can't transact. It is as if you performed a contract, someone sent an invoice, and then that invoice gets paid to someone else. Or you're at a restaurant and you pay your bill, and someone comes and sweeps up and takes the money and runs out of the restaurant as soon as they see the money put down for the check. Okay, we're going to have a problem. But that's basically, this entire thing is structured in this way. All right, so with that long preamble, I was asked to explain in detail stuff about the blockchain before getting into the actual paper. What I want to do, the outline for the rest of the talk, we're going to do 4 things. The first is we're going to wind back 3,000 years in time to another dilemma that on the face of it seems very far removed from the blockchain, but is going to turn out to be the same thing. It's King Solomon's dilemma. Then we're going to do a model of blockchain front running, very simple one. We're going to implement, we're going to propose and prove that a mechanism, which is a simple clause added to smart contracts, could, if it proliferates, resolve this problem completely. And then we're going to talk about some implementation issues, which I already know have been asked on Twitter. Yeah, I've got a question.
Professor Gans, Henry here. Yeah. about the liquid, I understand the front running, you change orders. So you place a small order before a big order. Liquidation, is that because the contract was written in a way there's a loophole, or it's like inherent with the blockchain?
No, I think the term, again, these terms are odd. I think the term liquidation comes from DeFi, which is people are having loans. And so someone says, okay, I want to liquidate my loan. So if you agree that I can do that, you send a request for the payment to come back. And so that was the term liquidation. But what I think that is for this general problem of, if someone is performing a contract and requesting payment, that's when the front running occurs.
But in the verification, your message will be broadcast. It has to be consistent with the original message. Otherwise, it cannot be broadcast.
It does. But here's the thing. It will be consistent because you get to see it, because the message has to be shown. So the message may be, for instance, a pointer to an oracle or something that demonstrates you perform the contract. Yeah. Or it may be a hash of a proof of performance somewhere. And so if the front runner only has to produce that evidence and then swap out which wallet it's going to, okay, so you are right to think about it in the way we'd normally think about it, is that, well, surely if I've entered into a contract with you, I should know which wallet is yours. But the whole idea of this sort of thing is that you don't know that. You just treat the messages and automatically execute these things.
That's because of this contract was not written, taking into account that had to be like matching your own wallet, right? But if you write the contract in a way that, you know, the money has to send to the kind of wallet which send out the message, then this will not occur, right?
Right, of course. But here's the thing. And it may be that's, you know, that's one answer for sure. Mm-hmm. But that wasn't the promise here. The promise here was, you don't have to prove your identity and other things like that to perform these contracts. Some of these contracts don't even specify what the other party is. They might be a bounty. If anyone can solve this problem, the first person to solve this problem will get paid. And you don't know who that was, and you can't verify it, and you can't communicate outside of the mechanism. That's the whole point of this thing. Okay. So you're right. There are, of course, other ways to get paid and to run contracts in the world, but not on the blockchain in this way.
Hi, Professor Gans. Yeah. I'm trying to understand why this problem arises. To what extent is because of the network congestion? Therefore, there will be the lag between sending message and implement the message.
I think a good part of it is because of the network congestion. So, you know, truth be told, for most contracts, you know, if it's a reasonable contract, do I care if I get paid in 1 second's time or in 1 minute's time? Now, you think that doesn't sound very much. And I'm like thinking, well, if I want to get paid in 1 second time, it will cost me $200 or $300 in fees. If I want to get paid in 1 minute's time, it'll cost me, well, these days $10, but you know, it should be nothing if I wait even a little longer. But there's the problem, and those differences. That's a difference of 4 blocks. So some of these front runners are getting on an earlier block than the real transaction. Okay, so there's a real problem there. And moreover, of course, this front running is contributing to congestion itself, because every time you try to steal money and fail, it's still another transaction going on.
Yeah, probably, I guess, to kind of revise my question. So this only occurs for certain like payments. Suppose I send you 1 Bitcoin, and then the miner cannot, you know, change that to his own address. I mean, this problem of liquidation occurs for some type of kind of payments. Let's say I solved the problem and should get an award. Then the miner saw actually the way I solved the problem, then he just copied mine and, kind of put in front of him, then he's going to get the reward.
Yeah.
So this is for that kind of.
Well, no, well, it's for other problems as well. I mean, it's like all of them have this thing. That problem, you can sort of see it more clearly. But again, remember the promise of this stuff is not to have to specify identity and have external verification of identity. Okay. And basically everybody's sort of saying, oh, well, maybe it's better to have that. And what we're trying to do at the moment is trying to say, well, is that, can we save this without having that issue? I noticed there was a question in the chat of where this model is going to come into, whether it's going to be layer 1, layer 2 MEV or both. Neither. This could all be implemented today, and we'll show you that when we talk about that at the contract level. So we'll come to that. All right, let me go on to King Solomon's baby ownership dispute. I know we've got a diverse crowd here, so let me try and summarize this, because you might not have all heard the story. I grew up with it, but others may not have. So 3,000 years ago, the king of Israel was King Solomon. So this is a Bible story. And King Solomon had two mothers, two women who came to him, and they were arguing over whose newborn baby belonged to which mother. How they got into that dispute it doesn't matter for the moment. Now, King Solomon is known as King Solomon the Wise, and he's known as King Solomon the Wise for what he did next. He said to these two mothers, okay, look, the fair thing to do, I can't tell who's the real mother. The fair thing to do is to take the baby and cut it in half, and you can each have half the baby. Doesn't take a genius to work out that that's not what he was saying. He was saying, we're going to kill the baby. And the story goes is that the mother who turned out the woman who turned out not to be the true mother said, fine, I'll take half the baby. The true mother said, no, the last thing I want is you to kill the baby, just give it to her. And King Solomon said, since you're willing to give up the baby, you must be the real mother, you can have the baby. People say it was wise. Now, what was interesting about this was a mechanism. He proposed a set of series of rewards and punishments, depending on the sort of messages and claims that he got. And it was a mechanism to resolve it. So 3,000 years ago, seeing a mechanism, that's pretty exciting stuff. But let's talk about that. Let's look at the formal treatment of it. I'm gonna just see if I can, there we go. All right. Yeah, so let's talk about the mechanism. So the, oops, I'm sorry, I've got myself locked in a thing. Okay, so here's how we put it into economic theory terms. There's two agents, A and B. These are the women. And there's two states of the world, alpha and beta, corresponding to who is the true mother of the child. There's a dispute over the ownership of T, which we'll call a child. And now, just how does it work? So it doesn't matter who the true mother is, but we need something for the sake of argument. So suppose that alpha is true and that A is the true mother, the legitimate claimant for the baby. Solomon puts forward three outcomes. Outcome number one is to give the baby to A. Outcome number two is to give the baby to B. And outcome number D, we'll call it D, is to split the baby in two, that is, kill the baby. Okay? That's the underlying space for this mechanism. What was the mechanism? Solomon's stated mechanism was this, the thing he seemed to be telling them. Each agent makes a claim regarding the state of the world. Basically, is it my baby or is it her baby? Okay. If both of them agree that it's A's baby, A gets the baby. If both of them agree that it's B's baby, B gets the baby. Makes sense. What if they disagree? If they disagree, then the baby is split in two. And that was Solomon's mechanism. okay? Now you work out from here, it's not clear what the outcome would be of this mechanism. It's a little thing. Moreover, actually Solomon didn't run the mechanism. He had no intention of killing this baby. He ran this mechanism instead, which the only change is that if the two women disagree, then he may choose to kill the baby, or who knows what's going to happen. He also ran the mechanism if you both agree that the baby is someone, if you both agree that the baby's, the true mother is A, then we'll give the baby to B, and vice versa. So for those of you looking at mechanism design is about getting the true state of the world and then doing things on the basis of that. Well, Solomon's implemented mechanism was to encourage people to lie and to say that the baby is not mine. Well, at least the true mother to lie. And then it rewards the true mother for that lie. So it's not a very good mechanism, because if both women understand that mechanism, both have an incentive to lie, and then Solomon is left no wiser. So economists have realized for some time, and when we got the language of game theory started to analyze it, that this mechanism of Solomon's made no sense. It was a mechanism, and it was very interesting and a good story, but it doesn't look like it could actually work in anything close to practice. And so economists started actually looking for a way to do this, because it was not obvious how would you resolve this dispute when both women knew who the real mother was. King Solomon did not. And the only things you could rely upon were people's claims. So their answer was, well, let's not just rely on people's claims. Let's ask them for claims, but if they get into a dispute, let's, and I'm not going to go into detail on this, auction off the baby. So they basically, but they had to make an assumption. They had to make an assumption that the true mother was willing to pay more for the baby than the non-true mother. Okay, that's not an unreasonable assumption, okay? And had the money and had the blah, blah, all that sort of stuff. And then they auction off the baby. Now, it turns out that would work. That would work. And you wouldn't have to run the auction, because the mere threat of having the auction is enough to stop people from wanting to get into that dispute. So it would work. There were lots of problems with this, however. One problem, of course, not that we have baby disputes like this all the time, and this was a real practical solution, but of course, philosophers and others were going to object to the idea of auctioning off a baby. Secondly, it really did rely on this cardinal utility, that people could place a number, a monetary value on the baby as well. So not only are you auctioning off, you have to say to the mothers, how much would you pay? And the mothers had to have a limit. Because if they're just giving all the money that they currently have, it's not much of a mechanism. So there were some issues associated with this mechanism. And there's been research into it, but it all looks much the same as this. So what we really want is something a bit more practical from this. And believe it or not, before we got wind of the MEV problem, Richard and I were sort of thinking about this Solomon's problem as well at the same time, because we wondered if his two-stage mechanism that they'd introduced recently, the simultaneous report mechanism, could lead to a simpler resolution of the Solomon problem. And so we want a mechanism that's actually going to reveal the truth. Who's the real mother? We want the outcomes to be credible. In other words, you can't threaten to kill the baby because no one believes you're going to do that. Okay, that's fine. That's actually not that hard to do. We don't want the mechanism to be repugnant, okay, in the sense that there was no bidding. We're not going to have a market for the sale of the baby. That's not a good idea. And finally, we don't want the agents to have cardinal knowledge of the value of the baby. we're happy with ordinal preferences. I want the baby more than any other outcome. They both are there. They want the baby. We're happy for ranking of alternative things, okay, including indifference. All right. So here's the mechanism we're doing. Same setup as before, but what we're going to swap out is the three outcomes are to give the baby to A, give the baby to B, or to allocate the baby to a third party. And here's the simultaneous report mechanism. You choose an agent at random, we'll call them the proposer, and they make a proposal to the responder R. If the message of the proposer and the responder are the same, give the money to, give the true mother is A, then choose A. If they're the same, give them the true mother is B, then give it to B. If they're different, you find them both. Some's fine, and don't worry, this can turn out to be arbitrarily small, it turns out. And you begin a challenge stage. And in the challenge stage, here's what happens. You ask the proposer, do you change your mind? Send us a new message. And if the proposer in the challenge stage agrees with the responder who said it should be the true mother is A, then you choose A and the responder is refunded their fine. If the proposer agrees that it should be B with the responder, the responder is refunded again. And if there's a disagreement, you choose C. And choose C is basically you take the baby and you give it to neither of these two women. Somebody else is going to bring up this baby. Okay. Well, I'm going to show you that this works under conditions. All these mechanisms don't work for any preferences. They work for some preferences. So what can we use to do the mechanism? We know that the true mother is one of the agents involved. We know that both agents know the truth. There's two of them. They know the truth. They would prefer to have the baby allocated to them, but the true agents has distinct preferences and rankings on the other outcomes. That is, if A is the true mother, that they prefer to get the baby themselves, but importantly, they'd rather the baby go to somebody else than the woman who's claiming this baby. So they're like, I don't care who the baby goes to, but I don't want it to go to this person who's trying to steal my baby. That's a plausible preference. On the other hand, B, who isn't the true mother, would prefer to have the baby, but is indifferent to where the baby goes otherwise. She doesn't care if it goes to the real mother or it goes to a third party. She could care less. And this is reflective of the I couldn't care if you split the baby in half type preferences that was in the Bible story. And finally, for any outcome, any agent prefers that outcome with no fine to an outcome with a fine. Okay. And we could add a bit of continuity there, might help us a bit. So under these stated assumptions, and for the fine low enough such that person A prefers the baby to go to the third party and pay the fine than to go to the illegitimate claimant, then you get the truth. And how does that work? Well, there's two cases. The first case is the proposer is A, the true mother, because we've chosen this at random. If we assume that the other person has claimed that the baby is theirs, then if you change your mind, the baby goes to that other person. If, on the other hand, you stick with your guns and you continue to assert your claim that you are the true mother, then it goes to a third party. And since you prefer it going to a third party than the other claimant, that's what you would choose. If the proposer, now if we work backwards, will the proposer choose to claim the baby as theirs? Well, if they claim it's the other, if the other person is claiming it's the baby is theirs, they end up, it goes to a third party and they end up paying a fine. If the other person claims that the baby is not theirs, it ends up going to the true mother. And it turns out that claimant prefers that the true mother gets it because they're indifferent between it going to them or someone else and they'd rather not pay the fine. Okay. So if you've randomly chosen the true mother as the proposer, it all works out. If you choose the other mother as the other woman as the proposer, now you're going to get a situation where if there's a dispute, then when asked to, do you assert your claim or do you change your mind, the claimant is indifferent between those two outcomes. But either way, they're not getting the baby in the dispute. And so in the initial thing, do they propose to claim the baby as theirs? Well, if the other mother, who's the true mother, agrees, then they'll get the baby, but we already know they're not going to agree. And so if the responder then says, no, I'm not going to claim it's my baby in the first place, they're going to be better off because they can avoid the fight. So basically the mechanism is constructed such that if you get to the dispute claim, you never get the thing you want the most. And the point is that the two alternatives matter. The other alternatives matter for the truth versus not truth. And that allows us to reveal the truth in the mechanism. So this is, by the way, it's been 3,000 years. We're pretty happy. This could be a paper itself. We solved the Solomon's problem, and it's quite elegantly solved, we think. So that's a whole other matter. But of course, we were worried about the blockchain. So let me get on to that. We're going to use a same sort of mechanism to that to resolve this blockchain front running. But let me go quickly through that problem. So what is that front running problem in notation? You've got a seller who puts out a contract to pay T in tokens for performance evidence E. A performs the contract and produces E at a cost of C. They had to actually do something. It was real work and it cost them real stuff, C, and they produce it. They then construct a message which says, here's the evidence, E, and I want it to go to my wallet, Alpha. And they pay a fee to get recorded on the blockchain for that. And they send the message, and the message goes to this thing called the mempool. Now, everything after that should go swimmingly if the mempool then broadcasts and gets confirmed to a block, executes the contract, they get the tokens. That would be nice. However, the mempool is the dark forest. They've broadcasted to this pool. It's sitting there getting assembled in transactions. Who can see it? Everyone. In particular, B. B sees it and says, I'm going to send a new message into that same mempool with the same evidence, but with a different wallet address. And I'm going to pay a higher fee than A, or what I think A is paying, to make sure that I get recorded earlier with an earlier timestamp. And so into the mempool that goes. Then what happens is these transactions get taken by the miner who assembles the blocks to maximize the fees. Well, if they're going to maximize fees, who do they want to prioritize? B. And so they put B ahead of A in the blockchain. Then the contract executes on the first message. And so S ends up sending the tokens to B. Well, this is terrible, right? And it's terrible because A ends up getting, they pay the cost of performing the contract, plus they've lost some fees. B ends up getting paid and they've lost some fees, okay? So obviously A wouldn't want to do this. If A knows about this, I'm not doing this contract, right? He's not going to do the contract, okay? So in equilibrium, A never gets a positive payoff and the smart contract is not performed. Now see what this is. This is, in its essence, a dispute over who is the legitimate claimant for the tokens. A and B are like the two women, and the tokens are the baby. It's the same problem. And what we want to work out is who is the legitimate claimant. So that's why we call it a Solomonic a mechanism to resolve ownership disputes. This is an ownership dispute. Who should get the tokens? Okay. Now,
question. So can Ace, like when he did this performance, can he just use cryptography? He can just use the sender.
Just hold your horses. I'll come to that. Obviously, Yeah, think like a computer science. So just 1 second. So yes, one possibility is when things go into the mempool, they're encrypted so that B can't see precisely what the evidence is. And then when it's finally assembled and confirmed to the blockchain, it's decrypted so everybody can see it. That is what the computer scientists said. Oh, no, we can do this. Okay. They haven't done that yet. Why? Well, that requires you to alter the protocol of the blockchain. And more so fundamentally, you're now adding this extra layer of computation on this whole thing. You're encrypting every message that goes onto the blockchain, not just the ones that are the dark forest ones, but every one of them. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's not a good thing, but it's a thing, and it's taking away from some of the features of the public blockchain that they aspire to. But currently that's a very favored solution, and the Cosmos network is pursuing it and hopes to roll it out next year, and maybe it will work. There are other solutions being proffered. One was to auction, to have more transparent assembly of things. But the best thing that can do is cause A to understand what fee they need to pay to get ahead of the front runners. But it's going to jack up that fee. And so it's going to make contracts more expensive to run. It doesn't solve the problem at all. It might do some good on the arbitrage, I don't know. But, again, and that has to be implemented by miners, and it has to be transparent, and people have to see what's going on, blah, blah, blah. It's complicated. So our idea is to impose a mechanism at the part when these messages are on the blockchain that could be run in the smart contract code itself. So it doesn't require any changes to how the blockchain operates and can be implemented tomorrow. Well, actually, it turns out 2 weeks ago, because we're going to show you we did it. Okay, so what do we know to do this? A and B know their legitimacy. The beauty of this framework is we get something very important for free. The legitimate claimant has to broadcast a message. So the legitimate claimant is in the pool. They're there. It's not like they were ripped off and they're not there at all. They're there somewhere, okay? And they know that they're legitimate, and every front runner knows they're illegitimate. So they all know their types, which means that they effectively have common knowledge over the truth. The legitimate claimant is part of the pool, as I just said. Illegitimate claimants, they only care about the money, is going to be our assumption. They care about earning the money. Well, legitimate claimants also care about the money, but they might care about other stuff. So we've got to have some difference between the two. So we'll suppose that the true claimant has a weak preference that the illegitimate claimants don't get the money. So it's just like the mother who didn't want the other woman to get it. They've got a weak preference. So if A is the true claimant, then if B receives tokens, their payoff is negative C minus negative FA. Well, if they do not, if the tokens go anywhere else, or nowhere else, they get a benefit. So they've got a weak preference. They've got an actual strict preference, will turn up, a preference for not seeing the bad guys win. Other than that, they don't care. They would prefer to get it themselves, but other than that, they don't care. But this is very important. And it's not unreasonable to think that people could have that assumption. So step one is we're going to solve the time problem. Well, the idea to solve the time problem, the first thing we don't want is priority winning out. We want to gather all the claims up over a period of time we'll call delta. And we wait for them to be confirmed on the blockchain, and we say, oh, look, we've got all these people who are currently asking for these tokens and performing the contract. Now what? Here's our mechanism. So imagine we'll do a 2-agent forms. It can go to more than that. You've got A and B. A is going to be the true agent. B is going to be the front runner. 2 states of the world dispute over ownership of tokens this time, not baby. And A is the legitimate claimant. There's 3 outcomes. You give the tokens to A, you give the tokens to B, or you allocate the tokens to a third party, say some charity, or you destroy them. It's an open issue. We'll come back to it. The point is they're not going to A or B, nor are they going back to nor are they being kept by the seller either. It's also important. Here's our mechanism. If during the time period, there is just a single message, give the tokens to the one message. Makes sense. If during the time period, there are 2 or more messages, then you begin a challenge stage. The challenge stage is you choose one agent at random, and they're given the opportunity to withdraw their claim. If they withdraw their claim, you give the tokens to the other agent. If the claim is asserted, then you choose outcome C and you take the tokens away from all of them. Okay, that's it. This works. Okay, so effectively, just because I know some people sometimes get confused about this, the mechanism is being run once these messages of claims are already confirmed to the blockchain. So if everybody agrees, the blockchain has already decided these are people claiming this thing. And then we run off of that, we run the code off of that. And we run this Solomonic mechanism. Either the tokens are going to go to the legitimate agent or they're going to be burned, is the 2 outcomes. Why does this work? Well, under the stated assumption, and the theta is greater than 0. Remember, a theta is the legitimate claimants' preferences that the tokens don't go to one of those bad guys. There is only a single claimant in equilibrium in this thing. So remember, we're choosing in the challenge stage either A or B to give given this withdrawal opportunity. Suppose we chose A. A receives negative C minus negative FA if they renounce their claim because it goes to B. But that's less than they receive if the tokens are burnt or given to a third party. So A is going to assert their claim. Knowing this, B knows that they'll just have paid their fees if they make a claim, and otherwise if they stay out, they get 0. So B doesn't claim and A claims and wins. If B is the random agent chosen to withdraw, B receives negative B, FB if they renounce their claim, and negative FB if they assert. They're never going to get the tokens. Knowing this, they stay out of it. They don't claim the tokens in the first place. So basically what you have in this mechanism is, because once you get a dispute, you can never get the tokens. For the front runners, that means this isn't worthwhile. For the legitimate claimant, they're happy still to be part of the dispute because they just want to stop the tokens getting to the front runner. And they have every reason to push that. As a result of this, they're the only ones left. They're the only ones who could possibly ever get the tokens, because there's always a legitimate claimant who's going to upset it for the other people in this mechanism. So just some remarks on this. This works if there's more than one illegitimate claimant, so 20 front runners or whatever, and with some pairwise matching instead of the randomization. If there can be collusion amongst the illegitimate claimants, they all work together. Using an iterative process would allow the mechanism to work as well. There's a way around this. And in fact, we had to implement that. If the legitimate claimant is not amongst the pool due to network issues, then the mechanism can break down. So you need to choose the time period long enough to make sure that the legitimate claimant's message does get confirmed. So if you make it too short, they might not be part of the pool. And if you believe that's going to be the case, then this is all going to break down. So you have to think about that. And we've got other work that shows this is robust to perturbations in common knowledge and other things that some theorists might worry about. There's a final remark that I have, is that mechanism is itself more complicated than what it might be necessary. We could have this alternative mechanism that we call the MAD mechanism, mutually assured destruction mechanism. It's very simple. If during this time period there's a single message, give the tokens to that messenger. If there are more than one messages, automatically choose to burn the tokens. So as soon as there's a dispute, burn the tokens. Because in order to be part of the mechanism, you have to pay some money to get in there in the first place. So unlike the King Solomon's dilemma, where anyone can claim to be thing and it doesn't cost them anything, because you have to pay a fee to front run, that means you've already got some cost of asserting your claim. And if there are multiple claimants, we know there's an issue. Now, so that might be possible. Now, it may be that you might have an environment where you don't want to employ that mechanism, but at least in theory, this is also possible. It's almost too easy. It's almost too easy. But nonetheless, you know, economics is economics. So the outcome with the MAD mechanism, B knows they can only be the second claimant because they can't be the only claimant ever, because they've got a front run. They've got to steal the evidence from the true claimant who's already there. Ta-da. We did some implementation on this. We've actually written out this code as a smart contract. It's available at this GitHub address. You can send it to us if necessary. Oops. And in fact, we ran an experiment. Simultaneously on the same block, we ran a contract without our clause and a contract with the code that it was our clause. Let me play that for you here. Let me know if you can't hear this.
Today, we're going to demonstrate a Solomonic mechanism to prevent front running, which we've implemented as a smart contract. We'll run it on the Ethereum mainnet, along with a naive proof-of-work contract that is susceptible to attack. The principal deploys either contract with some funds and a catch-up 256 target hash. An agent lays claim to the funds stored in the contract by submitting an input that hashes to the target. This way, we can mock proof-of-work reward schemes. With the Solomonic contract, a claim and challenge duration are also specified, as discussed in the paper. We'll generate secrets and deploy each contract with 0.02 ETH, which should be enough to incentivize front running. For the Solomonic contract, we'll set the claim and challenge periods to 60 seconds, or about 4 blocks. Now, both contracts have landed on-chain. We'll try to withdraw our funds from each contract using the secrets. Both transactions have landed, and on the same block, in fact. Checking the contract state on the Solomonic contract, we see 1 for claimed as opposed to 2 for contested. This means that so far, nobody else has made a claim. But on the naive contract, we've been front run, and the funds have been sent to an unknown address. Now, over a minute has elapsed since our claim on the Solomonic contract, and the state is still set to claimed. This means that there is no challenge stage, and we are able to safely withdraw our funds.
Oops. So what happened there is that we wrote code and we ran a sort of naive contract and a Solomonic contract. And the naive contract was front run. We lost our money. But the Solomonic contract wasn't. Now, that was a bit surprising to us because we tried to make them look exactly identical. But it seems like maybe the robots out there knew there was something up, or who knows what. They didn't do it. So there's still more work to be done. But we at least know that the contract can run, and that if there's just one claimant, it will give it to that claimant. So that's a good start. But there's more to be done. And in fact, there are a whole lot of implementation choices that are, things that can be talked about. One is, of course, how is this going to challenge response? In the mechanism it's described, it's like a continuing conversation. You ask people, blah, 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 but of course, no one's going to want to do that. So they're going to hard code it. Well, if they're hard coding it, it's making more like a mutually assured destruction type situation going on. And you can hard code the challenge response in that regard. No reason why not. Another issue is randomization. The Solomonic contract requires you to randomly choose a proposer from that. How did we implement that, even though we didn't get to run it? Randomization is really, really difficult. Turns out we think a lot of things are randomized, but in computers, it's really hard. You have to call an oracle, which is an outside device, to give you a random code, blah, blah, blah. We decided we didn't want to do that. So instead, what we did was we used the very fact of the sort of randomization of the arrivals of the messages themselves. And we basically said, we'll choose the proposer to be the last person who gives rise to a claim, the slowest one. The idea being that the front runners are trying to be quick. So it's likely that the true one will be the last one. And this might make it run a bit quicker, but it's still random who gets to do that, because remember, this time period is fixed, and trying to be the last person in the time period would be a, you know, a very tricky thing to try and do. The time period itself. So we ran this on a 60-second 4 block run. You don't need 4 blocks to get front run. But we just wanted to do that for our own sake. And so we did that. Obviously, the time period itself affects how quickly everything gets executed. But the reason to have a longer time period is so that no one feels obligated to pay high fees to get to get this stuff done. So that's the trade-off there. What happens to the tokens afterwards? This was the thing asked on Twitter. No, on the tokens can't go back to the original contract holder, because then they'd front run themselves just to avoid paying the token. So that's not going to happen. So it has to be coded in that they'll go somewhere else. So it's very easy to code it in verifiably that they're going to be tokens that are burnt. So that's easy to do. The other, you know, in our solution here, we've just left them in the wallet because we didn't want to spend them any more money. Not that we had to worry about that, it turned out. But you could also send them to a known charity, or you know, address that's verified or something like that. They could do that. But there's some decisions to be made there, and we don't have a clear view. Finally, this is an equilibrium outcome. You run this contract in the current environment, it's still unsafe. The front runners have to learn that there's an issue. Well, there's 2 ways to think about that. The clear way is to put a flag on the contract saying this is a Solomonic contract, stay away. But of course, that can be cheap talk. But then again, the contract is free, so what the heck? Well, it's free. It's a little bit risky. Maybe you don't want to run this contract if you don't have to. But you know, but you'd flag it. Is one way. That would mean that all the contracts would have to have that clause in order to work, and blah blah blah. The other way, which could sort of solve the ecosystem quicker, is if you didn't do that. But then you have to have a sufficient number of these contracts so that the front runners learn they're losing money all the time. And so you'd have to change that way. So how you achieve that, that's an implementation issue. So in other words, this, unlike cryptography, whereas once you invest and you do it, it's solved, done, here would be an equilibrium solution. But then again, you could start right away on doing that. And so that's a thing. And just in case you thought this is just a blockchain issue, here's one of my favorite motivators for why do we need a blockchain. A few years ago, a Lithuanian man was convicted of stealing more than $100 million from Google and Facebook. What this person did was send them invoices for payment for stuff. And it turns out that Google and Facebook, under a certain threshold, don't check to see that there was actually a contract there when people ask for payment. They just send out the payment. And this person exploited that and got paid $100 million. I think this person should have stopped at $20 million. They might have been fine, but they kept on going, I guess. They kept on doing it. So you need this inside current organizations. It seems it's not like this thing we've proposed is just like a blockchain thing. It seems like it might actually be a real, you know, the rest of the world might need it too. Anyhow, that basically is the end of my formal presentation. I'm happy to take any further questions.
Well, a quick question. Now you have to make sure C is different from B, right? So if like you know B has like some stakes as like in C. Let's say C is like address or like a token shares.
Yes.
Right. So you have to make sure.
Yes. Yeah, you have to be very, very careful. Yeah, that's right. I mean, so that's why that's an open issue. I mean, this is one of those things that, at least from my perspective, is it turns out giving it to charity might work. But yeah, of course, the charity might front run all the contracts and go on. Yeah. So token burning is the sort of safest way, if we really don't believe that. But it's just the problem with that is it's potentially expensive while we get it up and running. So there's some issues there. I mean, you can't take this contract out and be safe tomorrow. At least it will take you a bit of work to get safe. So it's not quite a solution. Again, it's relying on an equilibrium effect. And it doesn't, in the challenge stage, it surfaces the truth, but doesn't get you to have the outcome associated with the truth, which is paying the tokens to the real person. You find out the truth, but that doesn't give you the ability to act on it. That's the problem with these mechanisms sometimes. So it's not perfect, but it is darn simple.
Yeah,
that I'll claim.
Hi, Professor Gans.
Hi.
I really enjoyed the talk, and it's really interesting and fun. And I just have a small question. So if I understand correctly, the legitimate owner needs to at least weekly prefer burning the tokens to giving it to a thief. So if we compare this to the original Solomon's analogy, then there is a slight difference actually, because the mother has a real association with the keys. Therefore, she has some stake. But it seems to me
right. Well, that's true. But once the mother is faced with never having the baby themselves, what are they?
Yeah. So but the thing is, for any owner, whatever he invests initially, that would be a sunk cost. Therefore, it's kind of irrational to say weekly prefer burning is that.
So the way I think about it, you may be right, but of course we don't even need that in the mutually assured destruction version of this. We don't even need that mere preference. We just need I want to claim, and they have. So what they have in this, and that's why the blockchain's even a better example, is they have to be first. They have to be, they have to get there first. So they start the whole mechanism. Whereas in the baby example, as it was presented, was, another thing. Obviously, a baby had to be produced. But
once they make the first move, they are, if we don't forget about sunk costs, then she is in, or he or she is in the same position with the thief, right?
Well, that's true, except the thief is the second move. So the thief is choosing between, the thief knows, in our mechanism, the thief knows that there's already a true claimant in there. So the best the thief can happen to is to get into a dispute.
But that's
conditioned right.
The
and
base response, the first mover's response. If she doesn't care who got it in, I mean, she prefer burning it to anybody get it, because she basically gets nothing.
Think about it this way. Think about it. That's a good question. Think about it this way. Imagine that I was indifferent. The true claimant was indifferent, which is what you're saying. They should do that. And what they did was able to commit to randomizing. Does it go to B or does it go to C? Then it's still going to be the case. Now, so long as there's so long as there's enough weight on it going to C, it's still going to deter B from making a claim. Would be my thing. So I don't think we need something as strong as the strict preference that we used to get that sort of outcome. We just need a randomization. Randomization would do it. So they don't have to be as irrational. But no, if you instructed everybody, since they're indifferent, you say to them, hey, when you hard code your response, don't give it to one of these other people. then they're at least going, if they have just a slight preference for the truth coming out and for the ecosystem working, they'll act as if those are their preferences.
Okay.
Yeah, go back to the mother's example. It's like mother rather want to the third party keep the baby than to have a bad guy to keep the baby.
Yes, yeah, no, that's right. See, that's easy to
That's
think
why I
about.
say it's
It's easy.
somehow.
Well, that's easy to think it's rational because you're thinking about, well, who would want to claim a baby as theirs? They're already a bad type. I'd rather it be sent to a random anybody than to have that. Okay.
And Professor Gans, does the zero mechanism applies for like offline kind of transactions? Let's say I buy something from a guy offline, and I'm supposed to pay him the coins, but I did not.
Right.
And challenging. Does this mechanism also work there?
Well, I potentially. So here's the issue that's come up with implementation theory, and maybe Richard can chime in on this as well. Is that the problem is when we get away? What the beauty of smart contracting is, it keeps everything like the mechanism is supposed to be. It's all committed. Who sends messages to what and who communicates with whom is sort of like contained.
Yeah.
The problem we have with implementation theory is when anyone can talk outside the mechanism, it can be undermined. And so when you talk about offline and knowing who the parties are and blah, 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 you have that problem.
Mm.
So this might be why this is, so we often get questions, the question you just asked, well, why wouldn't we see this normally, or why don't we do this normally? And the answer is that the blockchain offers this sort of contained environment, and that's the opportunity. Mm. Richard, did you have a comment on any of that?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. One of the virtues, and this is in the sort of early stuff on slide 2 or so that Joshua mentioned, one of the virtues of blockchain is anonymity of the parties, and that, and this utilizes that in a particular way. But as Joshua just said, the rules of the game here are very, strictly defined, and they can't be renegotiated and they can't be altered. And that's extremely useful in thinking about how people are going to play the mechanism.
All right, I think we've come to the end of our time. I've seen some of the stuff in this chat, which I'll answer your email offline or online offline.
Can I ask a question before we finish?
Sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
Actually, I don't really know if my question makes sense, given that I don't know about the topic. So it seems like you solved a small problem. Well, you solved the problem for each individual, but it seems like you transferred the problem to the entire system. Presumably, you want the penalty to be very small to make sure the true mother can afford to enter the dispute process.
Yes.
But if you make the cost to be infinitely small, then you make the whole system vulnerable. Meaning, right, if I want to destroy your system, it doesn't take much money at all. I just dispute every single one. So I may be interested in doing that if I'm running a competing system based on knowledge from computer scientists using encrypt, something like that.
Yeah, look, that is entirely possible. I don't disagree with that. However, as usual, so in theory, of course, this is nice, but in practice, can it do its job? Those are the issues that come out about. Here's why I'm optimistic right at the moment, because we already mentioned that this problem has partly arisen because the fees are so high, and the fees are being generated by the system. So we're not even choosing the fees for our mechanism here. It's just whatever the fee happens to be. So if the fees ever drop to zero, you're right, we've got a problem. If they drop, or they'll drop close to zero or something like that, we potentially have a problem. I don't know, so that's a legitimate thing. I don't have an answer for that. I will say at the moment that doesn't seem to be an issue, but maybe you'd have to put a floor on it. You'd have to say that the fees for any of these things would have to be of a certain level, which of course raises a whole lot of other issues. But it's a good question.
Yeah, actually, I have one more question. It's kind of related. So theoretically, how robust this mechanism, this equilibrium is to those like a very small, adding very small fraction of crazy type to the, because in reality, it may happen. And if you really want to apply this into a blockchain environment.
Let me go to Richard for that one.
Yeah, that one I can answer. So a small probability of a crazy type, it's totally robust to that, so that the equilibrium correspondence doesn't change discontinuously as you change that. So that's one of the virtues. Now, when you get into more of these, is it robust to all kinds of, it's also robust to some different preferences and things like that. If you want to get into, more versions of robustness to perturbations of common knowledge and stuff, you may need to introduce some randomization at the challenge stage. So sort of an augmented version of what we've presented here. And notwithstanding the things that the challenges about generating random numbers and calling oracles, that can totally be done. But I think one of the virtues of this version is the simplicity of it, which makes it easy to understand. But yeah, if you're worried about that as a practical thing, that can be handled.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. So anyone have questions? No, probably we stop here, and thank you, Professor.
There are 2 additional questions in the chat room.
Yeah, no, I noticed them, and I'm gonna respond to her. I've already got an email teed up to answer.
And for those who request copy of papers, I can send the papers later. Okay. And it's a really great talk, and I think it's a simple and show how practical and how useful economics can be. And thanks again for Professor Gans, and thanks for Professor Holden for keeping you so late. Thank you.
Good night, Richard. Sleep well. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.